Welcome to UI5Con.
Impressive sound already. Hello, welcome everyone to UI5Con 2024. My name is Janina and I'm your moderator here for this afternoon in the Audimax. Also a warm welcome to our people remotely dialed in the live stream. You see already there is a comment section, so feel free to comment, share where you are dialed in from. Also your questions, so that is the service from my side. If you have a question, I can bring it from the virtual into real life here into the room, but please tag it maybe with a little smiley icon, something, so I can also see it as a question. Yeah, so welcome here in the Audimax. A lot of things are going on today, and you're here for Peter already, so he is here on stage for Bring Your Own Design System. I would say welcome on stage, but you're already on stage, so give a warm round of applause, and let's get started.
Yeah, thank you, Janina. Check, check, check. Oh yeah, you can hear me. So for this afternoon talk, I did a complete different thing a little bit. Yeah, it's not, let's say, showing the controls of UI5 at the end, because last year at the UI5Con, a colleague here, Holger Schäfer, reached out to me and asked me one question. What's the best and easiest way to integrate web components into UI5 or Open UI5? And I was a bit like, well, there is something maybe we can do. And I had not really a clue on that yet, but I was sure that somehow it should be possible to make this happening, that a web component, an arbitrary web component, a native web component developed by someone else can be integrated. And he had that in mind for a special project. And I wanted then to also showcase that these native web components can be embedded. And there were also some rumors, some myths in the round. OpenUI5 would only support UI5 web components, yeah? I call that fake news. The other thing, what was the statement was, native web components, I can only embed them into XMLViews using HTML. Fake news. Because if you embed the things in UI5, if you do that as HTML and XMLViews, you lose a lot of features of the framework. It's just plain stupid HTML then, but all the things you want to have from that, this is just coming if you have, let's say, a control and having data binding connectivity and all the things like that. And then the main question, is it possible to use my own native web components with OpenUI5? This was the thing I said, yes, and we do so. Let's take a look a little bit in what I did. For that session, I did a bit of a research. So I went a bit around to find a design system which is available as open source and can be freely used. For that, I went to a page. It's from Stencil. Stencil is a web components or a framework to build UI elements in an agnostic way, so that you can have renderers, you can have them created for React, for Angular, for Vue, or as native web components. And there is one page where they have awesome Stencil components, and they have a section about design systems. So there's a design system from Siemens, from the German country, so Colibri. There is also Telekom with Scale inside, or Porsche. And what I found there is a very easy one, which has an Apache 2.0 license. It's Kickstand UI. So I decided to use that Kickstand UI because it looked pretty comprehensive, although it's not maintained very efficient. But it helped me at the end to explain to you and to showcase to you how easy it is to integrate a web components-based framework into UI5 as your rendering layer. So if you have, for example, a customer who has his own design system, then you can take this design system built with web components from the customer, integrate it on top of UI5, and then benefit from the power of the UI5 framework with data binding or data connectivity and all the other stuff. So looking at Kickstand UI, it's available on NPM, and this was also then my point where I then get started on that. When you look into how to get started to wrap a native web component, I did the following first. So I wanted to just do that on a first sketch to get an understanding on that, how I can more or less do a, let's say, a handcrafted wrapper of the web components. And therefore, I first created a UI5 application, just using EasyUI5. Couldn't be easier than that. And after that, once I had the application, I wanted to use this npm package from Kickstand UI. And maybe you have heard that topic already a few times. If you want to consume packages from npm in UI5 applications or UI5 libraries, don't use shimming. You could do so, but then you have to do a lot of configuration. You can use this UI5 tooling extension, UI5 tooling modules. Install it to your project, and then it enables you to consume and do a direct consumption of npm packages in your application or libraries. It's configuration free. The only thing you need to do is to add the middleware and the task into your UI5 YAML of the project, and then it can convert any module syntax into a UI5 AMD-like module, so that you have a SAPUI define-based module you can require, and then you can make use of these dependencies. It supports also loading and including of assets, because when you have a design system, there is also CSS connected to that, obviously, because it's not only just the HTML, there's also styling to that. And then it also is able to proxy this access to this CSS and also to the SVG images and so on. And the other important part, as I said, we have this middleware. This extends the development server to be able to access these third-party modules or OSS modules. And we have a build task which ensures that if you finally want to deploy your application or your library somewhere or publish it to npm, that it includes properly also the resources you used for your development and publish it together with your library or application. So looking back into my application, the next thing is to install my dependencies. So with tooling modules, I install the tooling extension. And then with the install of Kickstand UI, I install this design system. As a next step, I need to configure the tooling extension. That's what I said. And it's configuration free. So it just needs to be added to the UI5 YAML. And with that, all done, you are ready. You can make use of that. The next thing for Kickstand UI was then also to look a little bit up in the homepage of this or in their landing page how the inclusion works. So let's maybe quickly jump over to that one. So what I took is then I looked at that, what they explained from a quick start perspective. They recommend to load the CSS, and they recommend to use either the ESM or the non-ESM modules. And what I did then in UI5 was, and we can see that also later on, I can show that also in the application, I include then a style sheet. So you see that include style sheet command from the framework. You have the SAPUI DOM include style sheet module. And with that, you can then integrate the Kickstand UI CSS. And then you don't use an unpackaged COM URL. You use a local URL, because the UI5, this middleware under the scenes, under the hood with tooling modules, understands how to resolve that to your node module and to prepare and provide the resource to that. And then the bootstrap module for that Kickstand UI is just loaded as a regular dependency. You see that here, Kickstand UI dist, and then I just load the bootstrap module. So that was the bootstrapping part. For that, as said, we see that all live later, and I explained it once more again. With that, we are now able, more or less, to consume, let's say, the Kickstand UI as a framework. And now it's the point to build the web components wrappers. Because what you have seen this morning at the keynote, these wrappers, They are happening still with a seamless integration behind the scenes, but the framework there does all this magic for you that you don't need to write that. But in the session today, I want to also explain to you a little bit what's in there in this web components base class, because this is part of the framework. This is the binding glue between a web component and between the framework's lifecycle, being it data binding or rendering and so on. So SAP UI Core WebC web component, it's like SAP UI Core Control. It's the base class then for this web components. And as I said, it ensures you to have this integration into the programming model of UI5. Then you can also make use of these components in the XML view and stuff like that. It has a mapping concept for metadata because, you know, in UI5 controls, they need metadata about which properties are available, which aggregations and so on, events. And a similar thing is available for these web components, but instead of that we define or declare this metadata and then use them in the renderer to do something with that or in the behavior to register the events, we in this case do a mapping to, let's say, the native functionality from these web components. And then there is something that you have not to write a renderer anymore. There is a generic concept of doing this rendering behind the scenes, because all is more or less standardized. You have the knowledge about the HTML tag, you have the knowledge about the properties, how they are mapped, and so on, and that's the way how it potentially comes together. So let's look into that metadata a little bit. We have here this metadata a little bit reduced to the mandatory parts. So what's new compared to the controls is that you have a tag name. This is the name of your native web component. So in this case, my-web-component. And then next to that, we define properties. So let's take a look into properties. The properties, it's a little bit like for the UI5 control. The type is the same. You can say string, number, boolean, and so on. But then you see this mapping section. And this mapping section has some information about what kind of type it is. It's a property mapping. Will it be rendered as an attribute, more or less? Is it a style? So for example, if you have a width property and you would map it to style, then it would render it in a style attribute on the web component and write width and the value for that width. There is text content. The text content is, let's say, the text which is then rendered inside the HTML tag. And there is also possibilities or extended possibilities like a slot that you have possibilities to render that also in the slot. But that's a bit more details and a bit more crazy how that works. But at the end, you can also do some mapping, like an attribute mapping to another name. If you want to change the property name and then have a different attribute name, all that works, or you have a formatter which can convert the value. And at the end, if you use that web component you have implemented, you just do it like for your UI5 control. You specify the property name and the value. And then what's rendered, it looks like that. It renders a tag and the attribute name for that and the value. So that's technically how it works. So no big magic, but it's happening behind the scenes. There is one more thing on that. When looking into the aggregations, there we have the concept of rendering our content inside slots. So in web components, if you have nested elements, these nested elements, they are put into slots. So if you have a list and there are list items, these list items are typically put into a slot. And in order to make this also possible for the UI5 controls, we have this concept of aggregation. So you have the list and the list items. And then by putting them into the aggregations, then we can define the name of the slot. And with the name of the slot, then this mapping in the rendering happens automatically. You see that also on the right-hand side. I have my web component and the aggregation name. So it's the aggregation name here. It's a type of control, because we also want to have UI5 controls being nested inside. And then if the button is put in, then you see what happens. The button is then assigned to a slot with that slot name, which is given here. If no slot is assigned, then it will be omitted, and the default slot will be used at the end. Associations is, I have it for completeness. So that's also then if you, let's say, have a label and a label for relationship, it's more or less that an attribute with the ID of the other control is being assigned, so that's not so important. But I think one more thing which is also important is the events. And all native events of web components or custom events, they also need to be mentioned here in the metadata so that you in UI5 have the availability of the attach event handlers or detach event handler functions so that you can do so on the XML view, make use of them. At the end, if you look into that, every event name is also available. You can register a callback function for that. And then the whole thing, what is happening behind the scene is that internally we are using the attach browse event function to listen to that and then to delegate this call to your event handler function. Then there is two more things to mention. As web components have methods or getters, you can also add them to the metadata because then these getters and methods are proxied from the control wrapper to the real web component so that you have also access to these wrappers. So for example, a dialog with a show function or something else. If you are interested in all that details, so the whole thing is also documented in the JS doc of UI5. So you can find also the things here in this SAPUI core WebC web component, or there is also the mapping metadata available. So if you go to web component extend, you see then also all this bit more described how that works. There is also some metadata options explaining all the things a little bit more in detail, aggregation, what slot means, and so on. So let's go back from this small step out, back to the web components wrapper. So what I did then is for this button control or component of this kickstand UI, I wanted to create then a small wrapper to showcase how that comes together. So basically, this is the code for that. You have a module which requires the SAPUI core WebC web component base class, and then we extend the web component base class for this button. And then you see in this metadata, the tag is KS button. So this is also, if we go to Kickstand UI, the custom tag name for that control. So let's go start building components button. So we have this Kickstand UI button here. I hope it's okay. It's okay enough. And this is the thing what I need to wrap. So I can also check a little bit down. So they have also an overview, like the UI5 web components also have, about the properties which are available and so on. And if there would have been slots for that component, this would be also mentioned here. But then this is something you need to then step by step add as a property and the event. And with that, you have now a fully runnable, let's say, UI5 control wrapper for this web component. The last thing on that is then how to use it in an XML view. And as this is a regular UI5 control, nothing could be easier than that, because you now have, let's say, this control available. You need to make your XML namespace. You see that on top a little bit. I can also go with a mouse then, and let me show that also later on in the code a little bit more. We import, let's say, the XMLNS of the control. That's the local namespace for the control, where the controls are located in. And then we have the control button, and then we can use the text property and the click event handler to do something with that. So now, run and enjoy it. That's how it looks like, but now let's take a look a little bit more at the real code. So, bring your own design system. This one. So this is the application I created. I hope it's also better readable now with a white one. And what I did to show you quickly to that, we have on the one hand side in the component, that's what I showed to you, the include style sheet, which includes then also the Kickstand UI CSS code. And we have the module, the Bootstrap URL for that. So that's all what I put in the component, so in my application as a Bootstrap code, more or less. And then in the button itself, I have this web component extend with a tag, and then the text property and the click event. Now let's run that. So that's it. It works, obviously. And now let's show to you how this is. So we have this live reload middleware running under the scene, so I can now modify things and can do changes here. Hello UI5Con. If I save, it's getting updated. And as you also have seen this morning, so it's like in the support tool, you can also see now, whoops, where I am, button, here it is, the button. I can see the button, and potentially I can also play around here with the stuff to update things, yeah. And see, obviously, I did one thing wrong. There is a re-rendering issue. That's something I need to fix with something else later on. I come to that. But if I would update that again, then it comes back. And here it is. So now, what I want to do, I want to show you that flow when I do that for another control. So let's go for another control. Let's maybe take the badge or so. Where is it? The badge. So this is a very primitive control. It has KS badge, and I have a color and a hollow property. So let's do that also quickly here and make a new control out of that. So we make a copy of that, rename that to badge. And then we have the KS badge here inside. The property is what? Color and hollow. Color is a type of string, and it should be put to an attribute. So we say it's a mapping to property, which is, by the way, also the default. And the next thing is the hollow property. This is type Boolean. And the Boolean is a bit special. I come to that when I show that rendering, because here it doesn't render a value for that. It just needs to have the property being rendered or not rendered. And therefore, there is also inside the base class a special handling for the Boolean properties to do that. So that's all to have this batch control rendered here. And now I can directly make use of that. Let's go for color. What do we have here? Prime, secondary. And we say hollow true. Go back. Here it is, but we have no text. So the text property we keep. Otherwise, it doesn't display anything. So, and we need a text in the main view. Text UI5Con badge. Da-da-da. Here it is. So, and when we look into the thing what is being rendered now behind the scenes, you see, it just, what UI5 does behind the scenes, it just renders these native tags. And there is nothing around, there is no diff or whatever around the whole thing. It's just rendered by UI5, and it takes care that these attributes like color, like hollow are present. You see it's also not having the value true, because the web components base class and the renderer for that knows that the Boolean property just needs to exist or not exist. And then, yeah, basically the button, it's the same. So, and the rendering which happens here internally in the button itself, this is the rendering which happens by the web components. And here, obviously, these web components, they don't use Shadow DOM, they just render natively inside. And that was also the reason why, when I update a property, this control fails, because the web components base class, by default, when it has a text content property, it just overrides the inner text, so it just puts text content inside. And then these stencil components, which are used here, they have no hook that they get informed about that re-rendering, and that they don't know that they should do something. Yeah, but let's go a little bit further. it's tedious to do that manually, to write that for all web components. And that was also the point of Holger when we did it for another design system. That was really tedious work, and I said, hey, this needs to go better. We need to do that differently, and for sure, there is a better approach on doing that. So for really a productive solution, when we start developing then, let's say, a real UI library, which should be a container for a set of components provided by a design system, then it would be good to have a generator for that. And also the Stencil team made a good job here on that. They have some metadata available, which is not complete. There could be more inside, but at the end it was enough to make automatically out of the box a UI library with all components for that design system. And that was also a challenge for me then to do the same thing for that kickstand UI in the same way. So when looking into the generator for the kickstand UI, I just want to bring up a few things. It was possible because in the NPM package, which was available, I found, let's say, two things, two metadatas which are important. There is, on the one hand side, this collection manifest. It's a proprietary format from Stencil, how they expose, let's say, the components available in this design system, plus their properties, their slots, whatever is inside events, and so on. And then the rest which was missing, so as this was only partially complete, I started to write a little parser for their design time assets. So there is, for each design time element, each component, there is a JavaScript file which has some meta information inside. And then I took a part of that to parse that and understand how they look like to get as good as possible picture. And for that, I created then a small Stencil UI5 generator. It's not a released NPM package. It's part of this monorepo I have available. But you can also then take a look into that, how you can leverage this metadata using embedded.js, or it's embedded.js, yeah, it's EJS format, to do a small templating engine to make then finally the UI5 control wrappers out of that. And yeah, why did I choose UI libraries? UI libraries enable reusability. So that's also why in UI5 we structure everything in UI libraries. We have also a concept then, like in applications, that you can easily make a dependency to that, then you get all the things loaded properly. And we have also a mechanism that we can package assets. For UI5 libraries, we package our themes with that, and potentially also with the themes, the necessary images, and so on, or other assets. And the library is more or less the container for that which transports that. The library also ensures one thing, maintainability. We can do centrally changes and make them available to, let's say, many applications. That's also a fact. Libraries optimize performance. Maybe not everywhere it's good, because we have in SAPM a big preload bundle. That's something to work on our side. But at the end, we have optimized loading with that, where you can also get then, let's say, more efficient the whole thing transported than if you would load single files. And you can also publish libraries. So if you build a custom UI library, you could put that to NPM and then make that available for others. They just can install that as a dependency, make use of that, and then yeah, you have already these reusable assets. Things many people don't know. Yeah, also in UI5, publish a library. So maybe that's something, Volker, we should also do to make this a little bit more happen. And I think also, Mauricio, this was part of that UI5 lab in the past with Grunt and stuff like that. This is not the right way. Now you can do that with NPM, really broad functionality, and you can make also reusable UI libraries available with that. So now, let me show a little bit a bigger project, because out of that small project, a bigger project came up, and for that I have put that also on on GitHub, and made it available for you. What I want to showcase with that project is I have this UI5 bookshop application in the UI5 ecosystem. So maybe we start that. Hopefully the other server is stopped. next a little bit. So this UI5 bookshop application, it's now still the other server started. Or caching. No. I know why. Because I need to start the bookshop. And not the sample project is also part of this monorepo, this small one. So let's start the bookshop, and then we should see the bookshop. So also CAP is now starting up behind the scenes because I need a data source or data service. And now this is the UI5 bookshop we built in the ecosystem to showcase also the usage of CAP behind UI5. And what I wanted to do is to make a proof of concept whether we can replace this bookshop application now with a kickstand UI instead of having UI5, but still benefit from our framework, because I don't want to rewrite the OData connectivity and all the things. That's great, great job what UI5 can do for you, and that's also why I say UI5 is not, knowledge is not out of date. That's important for you. You have connectivity, you get a lot of things out of the box for that. And you can even do one thing more now. You can connect that to a completely different rendering if you need that for a customer, and then also benefit still in the most parts of that from that what UI5 provides, but just exchange this little tiny rendering thing. So in order to do so, I created here, this is the UI5 bookshop app, but here in the packages folder, I hope you can see that good, I have two things inside. The Stencil UI5 generator, you've heard about that already. So this has a little bit of glue code magic, so if you look into that code, if you can do so, you want. It's a bit of magic in a few places, but I think it's, it's the most important part is at the end what comes out. So what I did is I wanted to create a UI5 library, so that's also created with EasyUI5, Yo EasyUI5 library. Then this gets being scaffolded. You can then also pass the name. And now in this library, what I did is I added the UI5 tooling modules to consume third-party packages. And I added the Stencil generator for generation. And I added also Kickstand UI. So and with that, I have all the pieces together. And there is a command in that library, generate. This uses the Stencil UI5 generator now for Kickstand UI to put that as in the Kickstand UI components, and then I give a little bit of information what it should happen. And if I now run the generation, well, a lot of controls have been generated in a second. So these are all controls available in Kickstand UI or components. And they are now available here. And they are available here with all properties. So you see that now for the button, everything is inside. And now, with that, I want to go further, and I developed a small kitchen sink here in the app, in the library, to see how all the things are playing together. So I have a JSON model, I have a menu bar from Kickstand, the button, form field, and so on. I use data binding to test and validate that everything works fine. So let's start the lib. Start lib. So it's a monorepo. This is the command for the npm start in the library. And then my kitchen sink application comes up, and whoa, this looks already pretty impressive. And here I also tackled the issue with the re-rendering. So I can now update also a few things. Maybe it's not perfect yet, but it was more or less something to play around. And then I found also one thing which is quite nice. Kickstand brings some overlay concept with it. And this overlay concept, you just need to declaratively map, let's say, shows basic overlay, and then it shows this overlay with that ID, and then you have a button inside, and this button has a hides command to hide the overlay again. And then I want to validate whether this also works for this integration, and well, yes, obviously, it just works, because it's nothing more than just doing HTML. Yeah, having that, for me then, I was a little bit looking into, how can I do that now for my application to have a different rendering? And in the bookshop, I created next to the original view, I created now a second view. let me see, that was the wrong one, the bookshop, web app. And then there is a view. I have the app view, that's obviously the current one. And then I have the WebC app view. And this WebC app view, this is now using as default namespace the XML and as Kickstand UI components. So this is the library dependency. So I have loaded that as a library inside this project. And then there is all this component needed as I had it from them. I just did most of that what was available. Used data binding for rows and stuff like that. And look what comes out at the end. Design system, Kickstand UI. Ta-ta-ta. That's the same application. And the cool stuff, all the things underneath just continue to work because the UI5 framework just runs like before. So that's what I wanted to show on that part. And yeah, if you want to deliver this application also later on, there is also one thing you should know. In the UI5 application, if you build that, if you include then, for example, a library and want to make sure that it's part of your package later on because it's not deployed somewhere else, then you can use the builder settings include dependency command. And if you run the build now, npm run build bookshop, then it also builds the library, the Kickstand UI components, and includes them into the package of your application so that if you deploy that later on, it will be completely work statically for you, and you have that also embedded in your application. So and if you look into the dist, you see how that looks like. Into the resources, you have this Kickstand UI components inside, and then also in that nested, there is a third-party folder with all that content which comes from this external npm package. And it's packaged for you already. It is already yeah, more or less bundled and structured in clusters, so that it has in chunks, so that it can be properly also loaded in chunks then also from that. And in order to do that, also the inclusion in this third-party folder, there's one thing which is essential to know from the UI5 tooling modules. There is this, where is it, the config modules here. This I have reused it with the anchor tags here. There is this add to namespace property, and with add to namespace true, I can define that it will be nested in the library's namespace to ensure that it will not be, or it will be available privately and exclusively just for your component, let's say, or for your library. Yeah, one thing I missed maybe, just to also remind that quickly. So there is also the Bootstrap, now part of the library.js. So in the library.js, you find then this Kickstand UI. So therefore, I made a template, which is then per library. And this includes, let's say, the boilerplate code with the required URL, includes style sheet and also this Bootstrap class. So that's the thing what it needs once. And with that, if the library is loaded, also yeah, the Kickstand UI will be bootstrapped and then made available here. Finally, what you should remember from today's presentation. Native web components can be easily integrated into OpenUI5 SAPUI5 using the web components base class. With that, web components can just be used like regular UI5 controls because you have wider wrappers, the connection to the framework's lifecycle. The web components can be also nested into UI5 controls and vice versa. That was also important because there is no difference at the end from that what it is. There is a full support of all OpenUI5 SAPUI5 framework features when using the web components base class. And this is really important to take away. The framework is fully available for you with that. And web components is not just something aside we develop for some other framework. Now with that, it integrates also back into UI5. And with the seamless integration, you will have also the full power for all the web components. And we also will work on the future that this works not only for UI5 web components with a seamless integration due to the metadata availability, so it will also then be available for other native web components as well when we have the metadata for them. Yeah, and this is, for me, also an important sentence to take away for you. Although OpenUI5 SAPUI5 is the reference implementation for SAP Fiori, it doesn't mean that you can combine it with other web components framework, with other design systems. It's the same like for any other framework. UI5 is also as open as that, and you can also take other frameworks to render, to do the rendering for you, and to do the visual parts for you. That's not necessary to have that from Fiori then. And for sure, Fiori is, when you are in the SAP ecosystem, the thing to use to render, because when you embed it in the enterprise suite and whatever, but you can also do it different, use the framework with anything else. And with that, I'm done in time. Nearly.
So the Q&A hasn't already started, but I have a first hands up. So I'm gonna, do I take my microphone or this nice cube? Okay, the cube's coming.
Peter, TypeScript.
TypeScript works as well with that. I just wanted to keep it a bit simple.
I think I maybe know the answer, but is it also possible to extend web component controls to another custom control?
Yeah, you can extend it. It's a base class, yeah. You can just extend it and do something else on top of that.
Okay, wonderful.
When can we have the generator?
It's on GitHub, by the way. There is.
Is it published?
Yeah, I published it today. But not on NPM, on GitHub, just because I was still a bit lazy on that. And honestly, we have to say, the Stencil UI5 generator, this needs to be still worked on, because it's not that generic. It's also, there are so many different versions of Stencil, version 2, version 4, and they have different metadata formats and things what are in. And also there is no clear structure on that, like in UI5, where you have clear points where you need to look up the metadata. That's not the case for the Stencil-based components, because there, as a design system owner, you can decide on your own where you put the metadata of. And this makes it a bit hard, and maybe we need to do some massage here and there, but potentially this could be really a nice thing to work on, to make, let's say, any design system easily usable in a few seconds for your project.
Thanks. And what's still the relevance of UI5 web components in this case? Because you can entirely skip it and just use any web component.
Yeah, that's now a complete different spin. So I heard people saying, with UI5 web components, you don't need a UI5 framework anymore. But in this case, you can say the UI5 framework is more relevant than ever, and the UI5 web components are not relevant, yeah?
Exactly.
For us, the UI5 web components, honestly, they are the renewal of our control development layer. Because in future, what we want to make is that we want to develop these components only once, and not only once for SAP UI5, but also for the other frameworks which are available there. And having something web standards based like web components available allows you to make them easily usable by the other frameworks. And that's, it's the key point on that, yeah? I just try to escape a little bit the question, yeah? But UI5 web components are not really, in this case, for that scenario, not really relevant. But you can integrate them the same way. It's just, for me, this was also when I did the research about the seamless parts, what I showed this morning, this was also the work I did before to learn what you need to do right, how you can get rid of the code. So like Daniel said yesterday in the recap keynote, let's try to remove all that boilerplate coding, technical coding you need to do. Just get focused on the real work of the application development and try to get rid of all these complex parts. This part you need to rewrite every time again. Yeah, that's the point, and that's also what I try to do. And these are also learnings in between, so it helps us to also get some, let's say, possibilities at hand. And as I said, also in one of the keynotes some years back, endless possibilities is what I want to have, to showcase different scenarios, because everyone comes with different questions and requirements.
Thank you.
One more?
One more hands up.
I have a rather short question. If I'm not mistaken, web components is a basic class that you used. It is still in experimental mode, right? Is there a time scale when it will go to not experimental anymore?
It works. So it's more a question that we can also potentially remove the experimental flag. It's more or less, let us finish this 1 or 2 rounds more and then, but it looks, so I use it already in some cases.
2.x?
That's definitely in then.
Okay.
Because web components should and will be the first-class citizen of the framework, so it will be in.
Oh, thank you.
But there is a CPO here in the room. I can delegate this question to you. But 2.0 is okay. There was one more question.
Oh.
Can you throw that far?
I will try.
Okay, take the helmets.
Please, everybody, be careful.
Nice presentation. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Is there a way that the renderer can tell if a complete flush of the DOM is needed, or can you do in-place DOM patching for some properties of this web
Yeah,
component?
it's mainly doing in-place DOM patching. So it's behind the scenes. It's using the renderer version 4 to update and patch the controls, the components, attributes, and so on. And that was also the reason why it removed the content of this one component, because it did DOM patching of the text content, and then the inner content of this web component was dropped away. So it was empty, yeah? And in this case, we need to have a mechanism how to tell Stencil to do the re-rendering. What I did, and you can see that also in the repository, I did a little hack. It looks like black magic code. But this is in the Stencil component. I use a base class for that, where I'm handling the invalidation. So I know if some text content is set, then I need to trigger a re-rendering workaround. You see it's ugly with set timeout, scroll to, and whatever. Yeah, that was the only way how I could teach Stencil to do a full re-rendering. And that's not a problem of the UI5 framework. That's Stencil who has, in this case, not a mechanism to say, yeah, just now render completely again.
So it's just forwarded invalidate call?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there are probably more questions. I'm not quite sure about the time. So we usually have a few minutes break until we continue at 3. So I would like to give you some time to get a coffee and sing and whatsoever. But Peter, you will be around here.
Maybe
you want to give him a try? Okay.
Maybe this one last question.
Okay.
And then
As fast one, did you try to deploy, run it in the work zone?
yeah, for sure.
No, no issues.
At the end, yeah, when you have the application bundled with a disk package, yeah, then you just drop it to the work zone as well. Okay, good.
That was
Thank
easy.
you so much.
Can I see your last slide once again? And yes, round of applause, please.
It's not anymore present, Felix.
Is it possible to see the last slide again? So because we have this QR code, so I usually don't do that, but maybe you can pull out your iPhone, scan it real quick, and do a quick, was it a rating? Rate the session. I think Peter deserves a high star rating.
That's up to you.
Definitely.
I don't.
Enjoy the break and be back at 3.
You.
It's not a competition. It is a competition.
Yeah, it's a competition for sure.
So be back at 3 with Easy UI5 Project Generator 2.0 for Nico Schönteich. He's here on stage.
Yep.
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you.